I'd like to welcome Dave Chronister from Parameter Security out of St. Louis, Missouri, to talk about security, cybersecurity, and how it impacts the automotive industry. So Dave, welcome. Thank you for joining us today on AutoTech Effect 2020.
Thanks, Mike.
One of the things I know that's very important for people in the automotive industry is to understand what cybersecurity is and security. Can you tell us more about Parameter Security and what it is that you do and your background?
Yeah, sure. Parameter Security was founded about 13 years ago. I actually founded it because I needed security requirements for GLBA. So my background is in finance. I worked for a large stock house in the credit card industry, and then finally I was actually vice president of IT for a bank holding company with 6 different banks. So I was dealing with regulations all over the place. And one of the issues that we ran into is we were trying to find an organization that could come in, look at our security, give us an unbiased view of what is actually going on in our organization. Couldn't really find it. So in 2007, we went ahead and founded Parameter Security.
Great. So when you say security, I know you and I have had these conversations. The term cybersecurity versus security, what's the difference and what does that mean?
It's one of those that when we look at security, we look at a holistic company-wide organizational security. And one of the problems when you run into with cyber is most people think about the virtual, the technical side of it. But we really want to worry about and look at your information on paper. We want to look at more than just your information. The simple fact is if you're not making money, if your business can't run, that's a security issue. So when we've changed what we call ourselves in the industry from information security to GRC, which means governance, which is how you run your business, risk, this is the different risk you face, and then compliance, which is, are you validating that your business is running the way that they should? And so we're actually able to look at all of the risk and all of the different threats your organization may face, not just computer-based.
So when you're talking about consumer protection and security related to toxic information, personal identifiable information, things of that nature, in the automobile industry, we're dealing with people's credit reports, we're dealing with loan documents, we're looking at registration data. As we apply security to the automobile world, in the retail world, how would you see security being implemented, or is it being implemented today in any grand scheme?
So when you start talking about the information out there, again, my organization, we pretend to be hackers. And in some of our assessments, we do what's called penetration testing, which is we'll break into organizations. We also will test, and we'll also go in and look at incidents that may happen. And one of the things that we find a lot is the information isn't really being protected the way it should. However, with that being said, a lot of organizations do have some sort of security program, but the problem is they don't have it written down. They don't have it set up in a way that the entire organization is applying it uniformly. So when we really start talking about security these days, again, it's one of those that we want to look at the entire organization. Someone's credit reports, that's a big deal. Someone's credit card information, that's a big deal, but it lies in other places than just in your computers. How are you dealing with to ensure that the information is not taken? How are you sure that the information is available when you need it, or that it hasn't been changed? So when we start to look at the security of an entire organization, especially in the automotive industry, they really need to understand they have part of it right now. It's just not a formal program.
So when you're saying security, and it makes more sense to hear it explained like that, I can remember inside a car dealership, people having access to credit reports, having access to credit cards to take deposits, walking deal jackets, which are folders with all of the consumer information, driver's license, insurance card, home address, printouts of their credit reports in certain cases. You're saying that it's not just everything that is transmitted electronically or digitally. You're saying if someone leaves that folder on a desk, that's a security risk.
Right, and we actually break it out into 3 areas of security. So confidentiality, that's what a lot of people think about security is, I got to make sure only authorized people or authorized systems have access to the data. But we also look at integrity. So what happens if someone gets into your inventory and changes the quantity or starts to change the pricing in your system? It's available, but there's an integrity issue, there's a security issue. What happens if those systems go down for 8 hours, for 3 days, for 4 days? That's also an issue as well. So when we look at security, really what we need to look at when you're an auto dealership or any business is, what are the risks that my organization faces that would maybe make me go out of business or not run at that point? Again, we're a technology age. We're in the age of information.
Yeah.
So it really does have a focus there. But when you start to look at it, you need to look at all sides.
Yeah, and as the transformation of digital retail becomes more and more of the progressive way, dealers are marching into that new era where they're, taking traditional retail experiences and pushing them upline into an online interaction with the consumer. So if I'm a dealer and I'm trying to make certain that I'm protecting not only my business from being hacked into my inventory control, my DMS, my CRM platforms, and my transactional platforms, how would I start? Because I think a lot of our dealer audience would say, I probably have had some concerns about this. I understand that I've done what I've been told or what I think is best. But if I was a dealership, how would I start to assess what my current security situation is, or how do I go about hiring a company like Parameter to come in and say, here's how your current business is running now, and this is how we analyze making you better in this area?
Right. So in our field, we call it a risk assessment. And a risk assessment is basically, what sort of risk do we face, and what kind of exposure do we have to that? So kind of think of it this way. Risk assessments we do all the time. You want to cross the street, and you decide, do I want to cross the street now? Well, there's no cars. My risk is pretty low. There's a risk I could get hit, but my exposure's low. Now there's a dump truck going 60 miles an hour, right? The exposure's pretty high. This can be as informal as the management or the business unit sit down and go, what is actually keeping us up at night? And again, don't just look at technology, but you need to have that part of that. All the way down to, if we come in, there's actually frameworks that we use that will go through the different aspects of your business. We'll look at the availability, the integrity, the confidentiality of not only your information, but your business processes, and even physical security, legal issues, and what kind of risk do you face, and what's your exposure. Because one of the big things you need to understand for a good security program, you do not spend $1 to protect 99 cents. If
True.
you have 99 cents, really, you should be spending no more than 98, maybe 99 cents.
Mm-hmm.
So for you to actually start to grasp around it, you really need to look at it and go, what am I really facing?
One of the areas that I know dealers are probably vulnerable is, high turnover in our industry. There's low unemployment, so the ability to switch, dealership to dealership for a better lucrative pay plan or somewhat, with that turnover and access to, passwords and PIN into systems like their online auction platforms. How does an organization like a car dealership who has a high turnover, how have other businesses handled being able to put a protocol in place just to manage something as simple as, passwords into CRMs and into operating systems?
So going from that risk assessment, one of the things to understand is all risks are not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an issue you deal with all over corporate America and even inside governments. And some of the biggest issues we've had has been because of something like that. What you have to look at is, do they actually need access to that information? When we look at security, what we look at is we say, what's your acceptable level of risk? Where do you feel comfortable lying? And I always just kind of explain it by there's a line. Here's usable, here's security. The more secure it is, the less usable. The more usable, the less secure. And as an organization, you have to figure that out. So let's say that it is your online auction platform, which is a pretty high security area. You should have maybe a policy of that the passwords change as soon as a user leaves, they're disabled. You never want to delete the account because you want to make sure that there wasn't issues going on. In our forensics and our incident response, insider threats usually don't show up until a couple weeks to a couple months afterwards. But let's say it's something as simple as being able to change the air conditioner or, being able to work the car wash that's outside. That's a low risk. So are you okay if an ex-employee has the controls or the number to go in and start a car wash? That's going to be a lower risk.
Yeah.
And again, this is where you really need to start from the beginning. One of the problems organizations do, and this is all of corporate America, is we call it ad hoc security. Well, I think I need this. I think I need this. I think I need this. I need antivirus. I need to go ahead and I need to put a firewall up. I need to train my employees in this. But if it's not a plan, it's almost trying to build a house without a blueprint. And that's where you start to run into problems. You're spending money in areas you may not have to, where you may actually have low exposure, and you may not be spending enough where you have high risk. And sometimes it's not even about spending money, it's process re-engineering.
Sure.
We change how we do the processes. Again, it may be more painful that someone has to use a password manager or something like that, but it is more secure.
One of the challenges that I recognize, I hear from dealers in the United States today is, revenue contraction puts a high focus on expenses. And, unlike traditional businesses where they might have a technology department, a network administrator, or someone that's managing database, that's a traditional role inside a bank or a corporation. But inside a retail dealership organization, usually that's not a role that truly exists, or it's outsourced. So a dealer who's listening to this presentation today is probably saying, I would love to be able to truly assess my risk, but I don't have a dedicated resource. Does a company like yours, do you work with companies that use outsourced network administration, or quite frankly don't have anyone other than maybe one of the guys that works there or has some experience with technology? Because we want to be able to maybe bring awareness to the enterprise level organizations that have the traditional resources, and then those that truly don't but have the risk assessment or the exposure is probably the same for both.
Right, and there's a lot of resources, and we deal with this with a lot of businesses, and believe it or not, some of our Fortune 100 companies have the same issue. The question I always ask the business is, what happens if your technology goes down?
Sure.
Right? You want it stable, you want it efficient, and really there is a business to IT. So before I started Parameter 13 years ago, my job as an IT professional was to ensure that your users work more efficiently and effectively, so they're more valuable. There are companies out there that manage service providers. They're called MSPs. They can actually come in and for subscription price, some of them do, for leasing, they'll come in and they'll actually provide the network for you. And you may say to yourself, well, that's really expensive, right? I can just go get the same material or the same firewall off of Amazon,
sure,
for example.
Yeah.
Here's the problem you run into. When it breaks, who's going to fix it? And how much money are you losing while it's down? An MSP is going to come in and be able to do what we call the mean time to repair. That is, how long can your business go without that function? Now, from a security standpoint, there is a tremendous deficit of people, 35%. And that's not just saying we need that we're not counting non-qualified people in information security. So one of the things that we started to do is when we started Parameter, we were a third-party assessor. So we would come in and work with companies, and we realized year after year, we're doing these assessments. We're looking at their policy. We're looking at their tests. Things aren't changing. And that's a problem. They don't have anybody inside to run the program. Understand, the program, someone running your security program is not the person implementing it. So the person that is actually coming in and installing your desktops shouldn't run your security program because there's biased issues. And it's not malicious bias. So we've actually moved into what we call the vCISO, Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. It sounds like it's just one job, but it's really your entire security department. And it allows organizations that are not able to afford or need full-time employees in that field to actually have fractional services to meet their needs to mature their security.
Not too long ago, the president of the NADA was responding to a request from the CPFB, which was that car dealers were really operating almost like banks, and that they should have the same level of security at every single retail organization that a bank would. And I know, the sheer number of auto dealers in the United States versus what you just said, I think I heard you say there's a 35% deficit in the employment scheme right now for those professionals.
Correct.
So before we start adding them into the car dealer world, there's already 35% deficit amongst traditional businesses. So this industry seems like it's a growing industry. Is that fair to say?
It is. The problem you run into with information, cybersecurity, GRC, whatever you want to call it, is an entry-level security person is not an entry-level IT person.
Sure.
You have to have people that come in and actually understand the technology. So my entry-level people have 5 to 7 years working what we call the blue team. That is actually fixing the issues, defending. And yeah, it is difficult. Now, one of the things about GLBA, I dealt with it for many years. I have a lot of banks as clients. I understand GLBA. As harsh as it sounds, it's a good thing. And what a lot of the automotive industry needs to understand, you already have regulations that are more strict than GLBA right now. If you lost your customer list, you are going to spend a lot of money. You have to report at a certain amount of time. There's 50 states, 52 different privacy laws. Mm-hmm. You'll have to set up credit monitoring. You may get a lawsuit. Were you negligent for everything? All the GLBA comes in and does is it says, let's set this up based on a framework. So, I've worked with GLBA for many years. Again, when I was at my previous employer before I started Parameter, I had a bank of 6 banks. I had a holding company and a trust. Every single one of them was audited by regulators every 18 months. I had a regulator in my desk every 2 months. And one of the things you'll find is it's really more about just, are you doing what you say you're doing? And are you validating that you're doing what we call the prudent man rule? Are you doing the best you can as an organization to protect this data? GLBA, none of these expect it to actually prevent attacks. In fact, in our industry, we talk about you have to absorb the attack. You're going to get breached if you're not already breached. Sure. The question is can you detect it, and can you can you stop it? And that's one of the big issues.
So the defense of an attack is important. I mean, because I know most consumers in the United States are looking at some of the biggest companies in the world, financial companies that have been breached. Experian, one of our largest credit monitoring, got breached and was an enormous credit breach for many consumers. As a retailer in the automotive industry, a dealer's probably thinking, I don't have near the resources that a company like a Citibank or an Experian might have. In that vein, are you saying that it's more about what protocols and processes you can say you've been following, make them sustainable, continue to teach and reteach, audit, and make sure that they're continuously being practiced? And that's a starting point in the event that there is a breach, some kind of regulatory action against you. You're able to say, here's our protocol. This is what we followed. We did the best we could up until the hack. to protect not only our consumers, but our own business and critical information.
Correct. And here's the dirty little secret. Every company's losing right now.
Sure.
So again, I've seen on the dark web my social security number out there. Now here's the problem.
Yeah.
It's out there.
Right.
My credit card numbers are probably out there. But if you get breached, you may have regulatory recourse or legal action against you. So what we really look at is, how do you protect yourself from going out of business?
Right.
And again, we're in Las Vegas right now at NADA. About 7 years ago, I came to a bank here, a $1 billion bank, which is a pretty large bank, walked in as the bug guy, and I took over every computer in less than 10 minutes. That same branch 12 hours ago had been robbed for $30,000. So when you start to look at what the risks are, it's bad, and it's really going to hurt small businesses more than it's going to hurt the large businesses. I mean, they have the money to lose. It still hurts them. But the average breach is going to cost you a minimum of $100,000.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the cost, because, you know, I shared some of these concepts and ideas with some people in the industry, and they said, well, I have insurance for that. I started looking at business insurance, and I can't find where it protects for those expenses and those regulatory actions. I think, is that a common misnomer, and people think they're covered?
Yeah, there's a thing called cyber liability.
Yeah.
You have to have.
Right.
And here's the problem with that. It's unsustainable.
Mm-hmm.
I had a client who had a ransomware, and the insurance paid it. It was $50,000. Their cyber liability plan was $2,500. So eventually, this is going to go away.
Sure.
You need to get cyber liability. The other thing you really need to have is an attorney that understands data breach, because it's not only going to be the regulatory. Let's say you go in, you do an investigation, and you go, we haven't been breached. And what breach means is an unauthorized entity may have had access to data. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily mean you weren't hacked. But what happens if you get sued by your customers?
Sure.
What happens if you get sued by your employees because it's HR information? You really need to understand the risk you're facing. And I think sometimes it's such a foreign concept. A lot of people just say, I don't understand this. I don't get this. I actually break into organizations. I've created Trojans to come in. I have $8 million of cyber liability because I understand, even as an expert, it's very, very hard to detect these things. The worst day you can have is when you're breached. Sure. And right up there is when you call your insurance and they go, well, you don't have the right insurance. Good luck.
That's right. And I think, you know, as we educate our audience about what cybersecurity, what security means in this modern age, defending against these breaches, these attacks, you know, it sounds like more and more that having a process, having a protocol, having a third party come in and give you an honest assessment of where you are so that you can make the changes appropriate to combat what a defensible position might be. That is probably the first step to any of this. But in doing so, you know, give me an idea. What does a cybersecurity executive, or even professional, not even an executive level, what is the average salary in the United States today for those types of professionals?
6 figures.
6 figures.
The beginning. And if you're talking executives, you're probably talking, and again, I'm from the Midwest. I'm talking Midwest dollars, $300,000.
Wow.
And all they're going to do is just some of the high level policies.
Sure.
If you can find anyone.
Right. And so, you know, one of the challenges I know in the article against the CPFB, they were talking about they wanted to make it mandatory for these types of professionals and executives to be part of a dealership organization. At those numbers, that is an enormous cost. And I know that's probably one of the biggest obstacles for our industry to be able to defend against. You mentioned something earlier. Explain to the audience what fractional CISO means, because that sounds like, you know, a fractional CFO or a fractional accounting firm. That's something that translates a little more for this audience.
Right. And understand that the problem's not just in the auto industry, because we do this also in healthcare, we do this in banking, we do this in general business. The whole idea and the whole concept is you can go ahead and spend the $300,000 for the virtual CISO, but he's not or she is not going to write your policy. They're not going to run your security program. Again, your security program is an independent function. They may not have all the skill sets. Testing your employees, training your employees, testing your network. All of those cost money, and you're probably talking more around $700,000-800,000 minimum for a salary at that point. So instead, a fractional service is basically outsourcing that. And the way GLBA works, it doesn't have to be an employee. You need a security officer internally that oversees it, because you can't outsource your risk, right? But you can have those functions outsourced. So you may not need someone 40 hours a week. You may need someone 10 hours a month. And so using a service like this allows you to not only get what you need in your program, and again, I understand the automotive industry really does not like the GLBA regulations,
Sure.
but you need this. As someone that sees businesses go out of business all the time, you need this. And you're able to, a lot more benefits. You're not paying salary of someone. You're able to ensure the expertise of everything, and you're able to run more efficiently and effectively. So yeah, essentially it's like having an accountant. You don't necessarily need a CPA in-house all the time.
True.
So that's what we talk about vCISO. vCISO, a lot of times, a lot of people think it's the executive, but we call ours a virtual security office, where it's all of the skill sets.
Gotcha. Let's pivot a little bit away from helping a business be protected. There's been a lot of talk in automotive about PII, especially in California here lately. And for those that don't know, personal identifiable information as it relates to a vehicle. One of the things that I know that you've worked with businesses is, how do we protect consumer information? One of the challenges we're seeing is so many people have connected their personal information to their vehicle and then traded into a car dealer. And what might be left on that vehicle is a home address, all of their contacts, text messages, their access to their security gate or their garage door. All of that is just kind of left with the old car, and you turn yourself into your new car and start over again. One of the things we recognized was what you just said a few moments ago, was if the business or organization under the California regulation had a protocol and was on a regular basis utilizing the protocol and enforcing it, that was a defensible position. In fact, the fine per consumer was up to $7,500 per transaction. So, in the car business, that's an enormous amount of money. But it was talking about, what is your defensible approach to maintaining this type of PII protection for your consumers? Is that more along the theme of what you're talking about, of what everything we've talked about today? It's about what your process is, how you're identifying it, and in the event that you are questioned by a regulator, you have this broad scope and plan that you can share with them as, this is what I've been doing. What else should I be doing? This is how I'm taking care of my customers. Is that basically what we're saying here?
Yeah, and if you look at it, and again, you're right, and there's the California law brought it to a head, but I started my organization in 2007. This isn't when no one thought that there was an issue, and I can tell you, the issue hasn't gotten worse. We just understand it more these days. I had a research project I did where I bought old hard drives off of eBay. And I had someone send me a hard drive that had personally identifiable information. It had government information. It ended up being someone recycling hardware that was supposed to securely delete it and didn't. $7,500 sounds like a lot, but what happens when the lawsuits, the class actions come in?
Right.
It really comes down to process. This is what a regulator is going to tell you, because I've dealt with them, is they're going to come in and say, what are you doing? And you'll say, well, we're doing this. Okay, does everybody know that's what you're doing? Well, here's our procedures. Here's our standards. How do you know that they're doing it? That's where your compliance comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, at the end of the day, no matter what your business is, restaurant, auto dealership, Microsoft, you want a consistent standard product. And it really does come down to those processes. When you're standing in the court saying, I didn't know, it's not going to really help.
Sure.
To be able to say, I did all I could possibly do is going to help you a lot more. When we started to see a lot of these breaches, TJ Maxx was one about 10 years ago. A lot of people blamed them. But what they're starting to understand now is everybody's having these issues.
Sure.
It's how you respond to it. One other thing about that, a lot of people look at compliance and security as, oh, this is just a burden.
Sure.
Why? You're actually showing that you care about your customers, that you're protecting their data. Do what banks are doing. Do what medical professionals are doing. Market the security. You are going above and beyond, along with your service, the security. You're giving consistent service and
Sure.
protection. So yeah, it really does come down to processes. And as we mature your security program, because you're not going to be perfect year one. It's just not going to happen. It's going to take years, because what you're going to find is at the beginning, you're going to go, I have a horrible program here.
Sure.
Well, let's start with the basics. It's turning that screw, right? As you start to mature, you'll start to look at how you can refine your processes even more, and you'll start to see, well, this is good for data security. Well, how about ensuring that everybody's doing an oil change the same way, that everybody's clearing the data the same way, that every sale goes around the same way? It all becomes part of your security program. It protects your business.
So to wrap up, we've got small dealerships in our audience, mid-size, we've got groups, we've got mega groups. Every one of them is going to be faced with these business challenges. To recap, what they should start with is a risk assessment. They should, after the risk assessment, understand what are their resources that they have internally, access to them externally. Then there's the constant training, and then there's just really the enforcement on an ongoing basis, making edits and changes along the way. But by doing this, not only can they market and advertise a much more secure consumer experience, transactions of a large nature, but they're also going to give themselves a business defensible position in the event of a regulatory or a lawsuit action against them. Is that a fair framework of what?
That's a very fair framework.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, as a business owner myself, you'll probably sleep better at night knowing exactly what the issue is. This is a health checkup, right? Where you go and you define what your level of risk is. You create the program. These are your processes. Understand technology is not going to protect it. Just like erasing the PII, you're going to implement it, and then you're going to come through and validate it. Then what we say is you start back at the beginning and you manage evolving threats or evolving risk. It's usually something you didn't catch the year before, or something that came out, or you better yourself. These are good principles. And one of the things is organizations just want to do business.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you as a business owner, and you're a business owner as well, is we are always aware that businesses go out of business all the time for various reasons, out of our control. How do we minimize that? How do we ensure that maybe the breach is not every single client that you've had for the past 30 years, all their data sitting on the server, but it's the data you need and you're able to bring it down. This is not an insurmountable task. It sounds like it is. The biggest advice I'll give your viewers is the risk is on you. At the end of the day, you cannot transfer that. You know, some people say, well, if you buy insurance, you transfer the risk. Well, you've had a brand damage. It is about continuous improvement, and solutions are only going to protect you so much. You have to figure out what we call that residual risk is, what that risk is there, and where are you comfortable. And you'll feel better. I think you'll find your entire organization starts to run better. You're going to have a better understanding of what you're facing. And I think that uniformity is going to flow throughout the other parts of your organization. So yeah, you're starting to learn how to trained for a marathon. This is
Sure.
your first mile. Give yourself a while. You'll be hitting 30 miles in no time flat.
Well, I think today our goal was to educate the audience and give them a perspective on cybersecurity is more than just cyber, it's security in general. The automobile industry is going through a digital transformation, digital retailing transformation, a lot of digital information with our consumers, banking, what have you. This is a great amount of information that'll help people learn how to protect their businesses. And we appreciate your time. Thanks
for having me on.
Thank you.